10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 112. Hey everybody, what's going on? How are you? Hope you had a great week. Welcome back to episode 112 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Really appreciate you tuning in. To everybody out there who's been a long-time listener, thank you. To everybody out there who's maybe joining us for the first time, welcome into the show. We do this every single Friday where we send you off into the weekend with something brand new to work on, a new PDF, something to concentrate on for the next week is our goal here. So if you would like to get the PDFs from all these episodes, head over to our Patreon site. That's patreon.com/10minutejazzlesson, or you can head over to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, and follow one of the Patreon links. This is a great thing. It only costs you $3 a month to support the podcast. Get every single PDF from every single episode, 112 PDFs that go along with this, all the way back to episode 1. And it's a great way to support the podcast as well. We are a listener-supported show, and we really appreciate all the folks out there that are helping us along the way to provide you with great content each and every week. I will admit that I'm recording this way in advance because I'm going to be out on the road with the band for the next couple of weeks, so I don't have any shout outs to give because I don't know who will have donated by the time this comes out. But rest assured, I will shout you out, and thank you so much in advance for anybody who decides to come on board as a supporter. There's also a lot of really cool stuff on our website. Go and check it out, 10minutejazzlesson.com. There's a bunch of cool stuff in the store, including our 60 Days to Crushing the Blues, which has been wildly popular with all of you out there. I've gotten some great feedback, heard some great results from folks out there, and we also have several other courses and ebooks and stuff like that. So go and check it out. All right, let's get into today's episode. So today features another listener suggestion. Today's episode is based off of an email I received from David. David's awesome. He always reaches out, lets me know what he's thinking about the show, has given me countless good ideas for episodes. So shout out to David. Thanks, David. So he says, "Hi, Nick. Your podcast has been a special focus on bebop, which is, of course, a central influence on much of recent jazz. But I see from your personal page that you are also fluent in earlier styles with several bands." And that's true. I actually play with a band called the Soggy Po Boys, and what we specialize in is playing original music written in the style of New Orleans. And we also celebrate that entire catalog of music, from the 20s and 30s all the way up through today. But that playing style is based in much earlier influences. So that gives you a little bit of background on why I feel I can present this stuff to you. So he continues, "I'm fascinated by the difference between styles and how players can invoke those styles. How about an episode or two in which you contrast the approach of a bebop player with that of players from the swing band era that preceded it? You could take a simple progression, say 2-5-1 or the A section of rhythm changes, and illustrate the device that a swing style player might bring to it. Then you could show how a bebopper would use different melodic, rhythmic, and harmonic twists over the same chords." Now, this is such a great idea for an episode because I think that a lot of us are searching for more of the modern sounds. But what we have to realize is that a lot of the modern sounds are hugely influenced by those of earlier musicians such as Louis Armstrong, Sidney Bechet, some of the real architects of everything that came after their time. And I'll tell you a little personal story. When I first started playing this music with the Soggy Po Boys, I was horrible at it because I had never reached back far enough to understand what some of these other players were doing, and I sounded like a bebop musician trying unsuccessfully to play an earlier style of music. So I realized I had a lot of work ahead of me. I had to start reaching back a lot further into the tradition and figure out what some of the things that made those older guys so great, right? And it really opened up a lot for me. It really changed my playing and even brought some of those earlier influences into my more modern playing in the best way possible. So that is a little bit of background on myself and why I feel qualified to write these two examples that I've done this week. So let's talk about what I'm going to present to you this week. So what I've done is I've taken a tune that has really spanned the decades in jazz, and that tune is All of Me. That's a tune that you will hear many modern musicians play on gigs, and it's also a tune that many of those names that I had mentioned also played. So this is just such a great tune with great changes that you can approach from so many different angles that I figured I would write these two examples. So what I've done is the first example on your PDF sheet is written in much more of a style that I would play if I were playing with a more traditional band and trying to get that more traditional vibe out of my playing. The second example is going to be much more of a bebop approach to the exact same changes, which I think is what David was kind of asking me to illustrate. And I've actually found this to be super helpful for myself even, writing this out and examining some of the differences between the two approaches. So let's do a little overview of the difference between these two, starting with the more traditional approach. So in general, now of course I'm speaking in general because you can always find exceptions to everything if you look hard enough. So I'm just trying to kind of take a 30,000 foot view on this. If you really want to get into it, you got to start transcribing some of the heroes of the early style of jazz as opposed to the bebop style of jazz, which I highly recommend as well, by the way. But taking a really, overarching view on this, I find that the more traditional guys, they used to use a lot more diatonic stuff, right? So let's think about like over a major chord. The guys from the 20s and 30s and 40s would use a lot of the major pentatonic to play over something like a major chord, right? And a lot less chromaticism. They wouldn't hang out on, for example, the major 7 over a major 7 chord. They would use the 6 a lot more, which of course is indicative of that major pentatonic scale. Some other things that I found is that they would leave more space. They would be a little bit more lyrical in their approach, kind of trying to recreate the effect that a singer would have over the tune, instead of trying to find all of these different passageways through the harmony that involve a lot of chromaticism and a lot of kind of cerebral playing, which we find a lot in the bebop style. So those are two things that are really, really indicative. More space and more diatonicism instead of chromaticism. So in my first example, I've tried to write this in the style of somebody from the 20s or 30s, and you will notice a little bit more space, a little bit more use of diatonic notes, more use of the 6 than of the 7, especially over a major chord, and just generally trying to channel my inner Louis Armstrong or Sidney Bechet or somebody like that. So let's check out the first exercise on your sheet from this week. Again, this is over the first 8 bars of All of Me, and this one is indicative of a much earlier style than the second one will be. So you can hear it, it really, really swings. Not that the second one won't, but it's a little bit more like something that you could create vocally, even if you're not a very good singer. Whereas you're going to find that the second example would be much, much more difficult to sing. I'm going to use a lot more of the 7ths, and generally I'm going to use a lot more chromaticism. I think that that's the real innovation of bebop, was using chromatic notes to create a much more complicated melodic and harmonic environment. So that's what you're going to hear in the second one. You're also going to notice that there are a lot more notes, And it really makes sense because Charlie Parker and the pioneers of bebop, they were trying to do something different, right? So they took the styles that came before and they tried to add something to it that would be more challenging, different sounding, would challenge you more physically on your instrument, and also be more challenging to the listener, right? So these innovations really lend themselves to the difference in sound. So now I'm going to play example 2 that I've included on your PDF this week, and check out how different it sounds. Again, same changes, same tempo, but it's going to be a very different thing, more challenging, and if you were to choose to try and sing this, which I think is the real test, it'd be much more difficult, in my opinion. All right, here's example number 2. So I think that the most striking thing is the chromaticism. That was what I was really aiming towards with example number 2. And I think that that's really the biggest thing that separates bebop from earlier, more traditional styles. Now you notice though, they're not all that different. So it's not like this is a different universe, because you got to think about the bebop guys when they were coming up, they were listening to all the earlier guys. And we should be doing that. We really, really should be. We should be observing the entire history of jazz, not just the one that we're most into, because then we start to discover a real timeline that goes throughout the entire history of jazz, which is great. That's a really, really enriching thing to do as musicians. So I highly suggest that. But it's not as intimidating as you might think. Right? It just kind of gets a little bit more difficult and a little bit more complicated as we pass through the years. Now, I would imagine that the majority of you out there probably need to take a look back more because we're just so inundated with all, including this podcast. Like, I do focus mostly on bebop and most of the more modern styles, which maybe I should do more of this early stuff, but I would highly suggest looking back at guys like Louis Armstrong. I mean, if you only were to check out Louis Armstrong, that would be fine. He's really the architect of everything that came after it. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody that's more modern that hasn't claimed an influence from him. All right, so really study these two things. Check them out. Check out the differences between them. I've even tried to include some of the same notes at the same points so you can see how I took a different path through the changes when I was thinking about playing differently, right? But both of these I think are totally valid in their own way, and I hope you can learn a lot from either one of those. All right, we went way over today. But that's all right. Maybe I should rename this the 15-minute jazz lesson podcast, but I probably won't. But again, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to everybody out there who's supporting us on Patreon. Thank you to everybody who's bought something from our store. I really hope that you're getting a lot out of that. And remember, I love doing these listener-suggested episodes. So send me some emails, 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. All right, we will talk to you guys soon. Hope you're having a great week, and I hope you have a great weekend. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.